Jan Sultan, direct student of Ida Rolf, 50 years plus experience in the practice of Rolfing. Been teaching, and you've been a huge influence on my life. Thank you for making the time to hang out and talk about all these things.
Well, I'm glad to be here and talk the history and a little bit about how things developed, how we got here.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I contacted Dr. Rolf, when I first got treated by her, I had never been touched therapeutically in my life. I'd never had a massage, acupuncture. Acupuncture wasn't even around. No kind of touch. And so I went to her almost as a true virgin. And, the experience was almost shocking to be touched that deeply and that steadily. And in about a day, 2 days later, I was working on some project, and I stood up and took a big breath, and my lungs literally crackled as they opened. And I had this huge breath, and after a few of those big breaths, I thought, that's from what she did to me. She made room in my rib cage. And then I knew, I got to go back and do this lady's work.
How fast did you feel that? Within a week?
3 days.
3 days.
The third day out, I wasn't thinking about it. I was working on something else, and I bent over for a while, and I stood up, and there was this distinct crackle. It would have been like Velcro, only we didn't have Velcro in those days, but it was that kind of sound. And some sharp rippling pains, and there were my lungs. Wow. And so then I went on to work with her, and after a while, I finished the work with her. I did up through 8. Then she left town. I finished up with Peter Melchior, who was then a practitioner who had just graduated from her training. He was my friend for many, many years. And within a year after I'd had that work, my feet grew a size and a half. And then I thickened up, and I started to look.
After a year and a half, you said?
Within a year and a half, my feet had grown, and I had gained about 15 pounds of good muscle meat. And I went from being a skinny boy to a thickened up, young adult.
And you're already like in your 20s, right?
27 by then, yeah. And then I went into my training and graduated from Rolfing School. I went in the end of 69 and graduated in the spring of 70. And I was really lucky because Esalen Institute there in Big Sur, California, where I was living, had a residential program where people would come in for 3 months at a time and do a whole bunch of the sort of new age therapeutic stuff. And they put Rolfing on the menu for them. And so I became one of the company Rolfers. So I had a ready-made practice. I was able to go right into work. And Peter Melchior and I designed this flow so that he would do session 1, I would do session 2, he would do 3, I would do 4, and then we could dialogue, like, what did you find and how was that? So it was really a great learning situation for me. And I stayed there for the first year after I was a Rolfing graduate.
How long does it take back in those days to become a Rolfer?
It was 2 6-week units. The first unit was called auditing, and we simply watched the other people learn. We watched their learning process with her, but we were mostly made to just be quiet and observe. And we could ask a question during our morning lecture time, but most of the time we're just watching them learn. And then the second phase was what we called clinical, and that was where people came in from the outside through our clinic, and we learned how to do the Rolfing on the class clients under Rolf's supervision, and then there was another batch of auditors watching us. So that was how she did her training in the old days. So it was about 12 weeks of direct supervised time, 5 days a week, boom, boom, boom. I had already gotten a massage license by the time I got into that training and had studied some anatomy, and so I had done some foundation work to prepare.
you had told me that you had she did you had your sessions with her, and then she told you, you're like, how can I get started? And she was like, get a massage license so you can put your hands on people, right? And then you actually went through with it and made it happen, right?
Yeah, by the time I'd done 7 or 8 sessions, I thought I could do this. I didn't have such a high opinion of myself, but I had pretty good mechanical skills. I could fix things. So I told her that. I said, I'd like to do this. She said, what makes you think you could do a work like this? Rolled her eyes. And I said, well, I have good skill, She said, well, at least get a massage license so you can legally touch people, and write me a paper of the interaction of 5 systems of the body so that I know that you can think. And so I went to the Pomona School of Massage and learned Swedish massage from the old school, who in those days who were white-haired old guys and gals who were doing Swedish massage, very straight up. And then I wrote her paper and gave it to her, and I said, okay, here it is. And I had applied for my California massage license, which was in the works, and I entered class.
And what does it look like to become a Rolfer now these days at the Rolf Institute? Because you were part of that, right? You ran that.
I was in the formation. There was no Rolf Institute when I trained. We were just her students. Right. But at some point, she actually created a nonprofit called the Rolf Institute for Structural Integration, and moved the headquarters to Boulder, Colorado, where a loyal student and his partner ran the thing for many years. And today there are basically 3 big units of the class, and they're on what's called an auditing phase, or what we used to be auditing is now Unit 1. And that's where all the basic didactic stuff is packed in, and where we make the distinctions between Rolfing and how kinesiology and, let's say, physical medicine holds the body. Because Rolfing's got a different worldview and a different starting point almost. So anyway, that first unit of training is to teach our touch, the beginning of seeing, understanding the anatomy of relationships rather than just the parts. People touch each other quite a bit in that unit. And then second unit is we study the Rolfing recipe, which was Dr. Rolf's 10 series, which is this organized approach, sort of systematic, to differentiation of old stuck together stuff, getting the longer connections between elements, cross joints to work better. And in that unit, everybody works on each other. All the students simply work on each other. And then third phase now is the clinical phase. Students don't work on each other, but they have people coming in from the outside who are what we call our class clients. And that clinic's been running for years, and we've had thousands of people through it in Colorado by now. And
I looked up, of course, when I met you, and I think when I first met you, there wasn't really Google. So like we'll talk about it later, but it was in the 90s. I was training. I started jiu-jitsu in your garage, right? So people that don't know that, me and Amal were training, every day. But when I looked at Ida Rolf, you read about her background, and then there's this thing, the human potential movement. What did she bring? What did she bring? Different to the game?
Well, there's probably some apocryphal stories about Rolf, but she started out she got her PhD in biochemistry, right, leading up to World War I, and worked at the Rockefeller Institute, which was a research organization. And she'd say, I could never have gotten that job if the men hadn't all been away to war. But she got in and, followed
Rockefeller, interesting.
Followed that trade. And then at some point she decided to go to Europe, and she wanted to study some physics. And she went to the Max Planck Institute in I believe it was Zurich, in Switzerland anyway. Sometime during that time when she was in Europe, she made contact with some of the early metaphysical groups that were around at the time. And none of that history is really clear, but she developed an interest in metaphysics when she had gone into physics. You know, they say if you look down the microscope long enough, you're looking into a solar system. And she began to ask questions about the nature of our human being, like what's going on here. So hence she was led not so much into religion, but more toward metaphysics and that study. Anyway, somewhere along there came this idea that she had that if you followed this template and you worked systematically with people and you got your head out of treating symptoms and you tried to actually raise the level of order of the whole system, that you could have somebody who functioned a whole lot better and you had better adaptability. So the notion is that as we live in time, we accumulate adaptive patterns in our bodies. We shorten up here. You have an accident. You get scar tissue. You get dinged. It changes your perspective a little bit. And her idea was that the nature of the connective tissues, which is called collagen, is sort of this base membrane in the body that can become, if osteoblasts, which are bone cells, are in the matrix, then that tissue can become a bone. Fibroblasts, they become
fascia.
Fascia.
The fascia.
And so there's a whole building thing that follows this connective tissue basic membrane. And her, I think, brilliant idea was that we could use the same mechanisms that people use to adapt to stress, strain, trauma, even if you're training in a sport and you drive a certain pattern into the body, you know, in order to keep opening the structure so that pattern can get through better, that you could use the same mechanism to raise the level of order of the body as the body did to adapt to strain, which was you can re-energize that connective tissue and get it moving again, and then the person has more choices. So this was her fundamental idea, plasticity, and the notion that gravity was the matrix that we were organized in, just like a fish swims through water, that all of our sensors are sort of patterned with this, you know, an up and a down, almost like a flower grows toward the sun. They call it tropism. Well, we're gravity tropic. We try to stand up straight. We try to get organized in space. So she thought, okay, this is a fundamental drive in the body, and I want to support it happening. And, at some point, years down the road, somebody said, well, what could you leave out and it would still be Rolfing? We were talking about technique.
Right.
And she said, you can leave out about anything, but if you leave out gravity, you're not Rolfing anymore. So this is a pretty key, you know, she underscored it like that, and I've thought a lot about what it meant. And in the way that I learned from her, what gravity represented was almost like a vertical line, which was the logo of relationship between our bodies and the planet and the far stars, so that we were organized around a line of relationship. And then once you had the line, then if your horizontals to the line were true, then you got a very stable structure. And if the horizontals went off, then the body would move from one side to the other and shorten and twist in order to stay on the line, but it would wrap around the line. The line is not a material thing, though. The line is the concept of a line allowed us to evaluate somebody standing, walking, moving, and go, okay, I know what I can do to organize this person, help them find the line. And as soon as somebody hits the line and the structure begins to organize around it, they decompress. So they naturally get longer. And that's not long. It's just that they decompress and unload, and then we theoretically would have better space between the joints and more elasticity, more adaptability.
Do you know how she developed her 10 series? How that came about?
Well, I don't. I don't actually know. I once heard a story that somebody else heard. So this is
Right. You're the one that you always have the stories. That's why I'm asking you.
so this is the story that I heard from somebody, not Rolf, but somebody else, who said that somewhere at the time that she was studying the metaphysics, she got the idea that something like Rolfing had been done as an initiation for acolytes in the ancient temples of Egypt, of men and women who were entering that priesthood, went through some process to clarify the body, to clear the obstructions, to clear the sort of the body from being so personal and move into a more universal expression of itself, and that this would allow it to, God help me, to circulate higher energies. I mean, Rolf would smack me for saying that, because if you ever said the word energy around her, she'd say, "What do you mean by energy?" And then you were stuck, of course, because you can, it's pretty hard.
She didn't like the word energy?
She didn't like using words like energy that didn't have definition, but that excited people. So she said part of her teaching was, you gotta, if you mean to communicate with somebody, you have to get you're responsible for framing your communication so they can get it. So if you use an abstraction like energy, you have to make sure what you mean by energy. Do I mean how easy your knee moves forward and back? Or do I mean how hot your metabolism is burning? Or do I mean how spiritually evolved you are? So if you're going to use it clearly, you have to stop and define it, and then it can be used in conversation, and we're both on the same page. And she was a stickler about this, that how you speak of it is really a reflection of how much you understand it. So she didn't like that flighty sort of
term energy.
What I would call the New Age way of describing things, you know.
I would just think that I would think of it, as your life force, right? As your energy that you're able to put out, and how well you're functioning, your efficiency.
That would be your level of energy. If I think about my own definition, which I've come to over all these years, because when Rolf said, "Don't use the word energy unless you know what you're talking about,"
define it.
Okay, when I made contact at first with traditional Oriental medicine and the concepts of qi and the circulation of qi, microcosmic orbit, moving through the body, macro, the connection of the rising and descending qi into heaven and earth, and the mixing of these in the dantian with the energy of the organism that was their ancestral energy. So the ancestral energy is really in the kidneys, they say, and then heaven and earth mix in the dantian, which is this cauldron between the navel and the pubes, and that's where the practices of qigong and stuff are really drawing heaven and earth and mixing it with ancestral energy and creating a different body. And so, I mean, this is all the inquiry, Alberto. It's not like what I think I know. These were the questions I was asking as I was trying to figure out what made Rolfing special. And sometimes people would get Rolfed and they would have a very numinous, shift of their awareness of themselves. And I would watch that and I would go, okay, there's that energy thing she talked about. But I don't say it to a person I've been treating. I just say, what are you feeling? I say, wow, I feel taller, I feel looser, I feel lighter, I feel like I can express myself differently. I've treated lots and lots of artists and, people in the fine arts, like musicians and singers, and a lot of them come back and talk about their creativity being more open. I've treated plenty of athletes who say, something? I'm beating people on the soccer field that used to catch me, which simply meant they could extend better in their running, and get more speed out of the same vitality,
I remember in my early 20s, I moved back from Brazil, and people were talking about chakras and all these different things, new age things in Santa Fe, right? Because that's where I was, I was living, and
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, I would just kind of roll my eyes, and I don't think it was until I really met you, and I hurt my back. I was squatting, I think, and I hurt my back, and of course, I remembered you. I was like, okay, you made an appointment with me, and I went and saw you, and you touched my back, and usually people ask you, is it hurt here? Does it hurt here? And you just knew where it was, and you just, I don't know, you did all the right things, and I think subconsciously thought to myself, I want to be like that. I want to be that. I want to have that kind of mastery at something. I want to have that kind of understanding.
It's great to be good at something. And, we're not, I sometimes think of myself as kind of a one-trick pony, that I got really good at this, but there's a whole bunch of other things that I'm not good at all. And in today's world, I wonder, how do young people, find that groove where, I'm going there, I'm going to be an expert at that, and and it's pretty easy to be a jack of all trades, like, I know a little of this, a little of that, and But Rolf said something about this. She said, there's a lot of ways to get to higher levels of performance. You can either take one road and drive it all the way through and pop out the other end, and you've gotten there. Or you can study this, and that, and all kinds of different stuff, and finally you hit a point of synthesis, and then you are, quote, there. She said, the first road is harder, but it's shorter. And so I've always thought about that, like, okay. And I just actually took that short road, really, because when I trained with Ida Rolf, like you said, there wasn't any Google. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to study anatomy, you got a darn textbook. You couldn't take a workshop and learn a bit of somebody's discovery. You actually had to study or go and get treated by them and feel how they treated you, and then figure out what did they do. And maybe, I had chiropractic textbooks. I had textbooks from osteopathy, even from physical therapy, and that I would study. I was studying by myself because I basically only had a high school education, and I had gone directly into the world. And then, I had my massage school, but that was really, I'd say, pretty lightweight. So I studied all my life, but I've studied this thing and the things that are related to it.
Yeah, you had said Ida Rolf, she was always studying. She would come back, but she was always out there learning. And you say these little things that I always remember, these little nuggets, and I kind of I was like, yeah, you always need to be learning. And when people talk about you, they say the same thing. Like, he's always, I talk to Bruce Schoenfeld or anybody else that knows you. He's always out there studying. I was out there learning.
I love it. It's my kind of hobby in a way. I'm really lucky in that. That my profession and my interest went the same way. I don't have something over here that's a diversion. I used to love to hunt and hike and do other stuff, but this was my main thing. When my dear friend Theo Billet, who I've known since he was 7 years old, kind of like you, when he came back from the Olympics, where he was recruited for the U.S. rowing team,
right, out
of UCLA, he said, I was the hippie kid from Taos, and after workouts, I was the guy who massaged my teammates, to try and iron out the knots, because when I was a kid, people massaged on me. And then he hurt his back, and he came, and he said, I need help. We got his back, and then he said, hey, can I study with you? Same pattern. So Theo and I worked together for years. And later, when he began hunting a lot, he took me hunting and gave me back the gift and took me in and taught me his field craft. So we hunted together quite a bit.
Yeah, Theo, I met him, I think, probably through Amal, and he turned me on to magnesium, the Calm, to recover from training, because I would always overtrain. I would always do too much. He's like, have you tried Calm? And it changed my life. Yeah. And he would always also talk about you. You know, I was talking about Bruce, but he would talk about you too. You know, and I think when I hurt my back, you know, that it just, you know, the stars were lined up. You know, I need to go see Jan because you had moved out of Santa Fe, I think, at that point to Espanola.
Yeah, I was living 15 miles
away,
away.
Which wasn't a big deal, but.
But the reason I talked about the hunting was important because when we would field dress animals, it was like having your own dissection lab, you know, and you know, the hunters are wanting to get the hide off and cut it up into chunks, put it in your backpack and haul it to the car. And I'd always say, slow down. Look at how this fits together. Oh my God, look at the diaphragm here. And so for me, the butchering was always also an anatomy lesson, and it really did help my understanding, deepen my inside maps about how we're arranged.
You could always tell me the more you know, the more you can, or the more you know, the more you can see, you know. And studying anatomy, you know, I was lucky enough you allowed me to go into that cranial sacrum workshop that you did, and just all these like these little nuggets, you know. But the more you know, the more you can see, and that's why like just studying all the anatomy and studying studying, right, allows you to do that. And
there's a kind of a weird paradox between what I call sort of like gaining knowledge. You know, that every time you get some really good insight, it opens more questions. So there's this odd inverse proportion, which is the more I know, the dumber I get. and you finally realize you can study and study and study, and you will never get it. Your questions will change. The mystery will get bigger, but you aren't going to figure it out. And there's something inside of us that can then relax and go, oh, okay, I can be a lifetime student. I can study hard. I can get good at this, but I'm not going to top out. I'm going to be always learning. And I think that's a precious gift. Yeah, that, like, okay.
I was thinking about, I went to that fascia conference in Berlin some years back, and they had, you know, some pretty high-level people in there. And one of the things I took away was how, you know, they didn't say this is how it is. They were humble enough to be like, we think this is what it is, but we don't know.
Yeah, and the inquiry goes on. There's a whole nother layer that's come into the, let's say, the field of inquiry, that up until probably the mid-'80s, everybody who studied physical medicine at whatever level or whatever we call this, we were told that the nerves were endangerment sites. That you want to be really careful about pressing on nerves, especially about putting them up against bone where you might damage a nerve. Surgeons learned, you know, oh boy, you go very carefully layering through the tissue so you don't damage any nerves. And in the mid-'80s, this physical therapist from Australia named Butler wrote a book called I'm going to say it was Manual Therapy for the Nervous System, but that I might not have the title quite right. Maybe I'll remember it in a sec. And basically what Butler had done was say, look, the nerves are structural elements. They have a connective tissue wrapping. They have some kind of conductive quality inside. But if a nerve gets in trouble, it can swell and shorten and actually limit the range of motion of a limb because the nerve is supposed to glide. So his initial technique was called pin and pull, where you'd hold where the nerve, let's say, crossed at the elbow, and then you'd extend, stretch, drop the hand, move around. I could feel it now tugging on me. This nerve in me is working okay, so it glides in the tissue. But Butler pointed to this and he said, there is a whole bunch that we can do with actual direct manipulation of the nerves, you know, in concert with rehabilitation and, you know, getting people out of trouble, chronic pain, blah, blah, blah. So Butler's work followed this line for a while, and then he popped out and he began to say that even more important than the nerve per se is how the person's imagery organizes around sensation. So that, let's say, I'm just making an example, let's say you dinged your knee, and it wasn't deeply, torn apart, but it hit hard enough to hurt. And so the brain goes, knee hurts, and you're limping, and you're being careful of the knee, and you're watching it when you turn, and, it's a little tricky for a while. And as the knee heals and stabilizes, the brain is still hypervigilant, in a sense, looking down at the knee and going, is that knee really okay? Wow, that knee hurt pretty bad a while ago. I don't trust that knee hurts. And that these loops form where people can't finish the healing because the brain, and I say the brain, I don't mean the brain organ, but I really mean almost the neural net.
Thalamus and
has a hypervigilance that's looking at that part and doesn't quite trust it. So that sometimes that final element of healing often has to be in that perceptual matrix where there is there's a closure, and the circuitry can go, okay, the knee's good, guys. Rock and roll, run, play, go skating, whatever you do. So this is where Butler's work evolved, and he's got a website called Explain Pain. He and his buddy, whose name is Lorimer Mosley, the two of them do a lot of collaboration. And if you get on Explain Pain, you can download some of their stuff. It's very interesting. And oddly enough, for me, it ties all the way back to the human potential movement in the 60s and 70s, where I first intersected this stuff, where the early human potential movement, Fritz Perls said this. He was a student of Sigmund Freud. He was a psychiatrist. And Rolf originally came from New York to Esalen to work on Fritz Perls because Fritz was having some heart pain, angina. And after he got a bunch of Rolfing, he said everybody who is in psychotherapy must get Rolf to release the memories from the body that are held in the contraction. So it's beautiful for me to see, here we are 50 years later, walk all around this circle, and here's Mosley and Butler pointing at perception and saying that stuff has to be released for people to finish healing. And I think it's the same story. It's at another octave, but it's beautiful. It's deepening our understanding.
The psychology, I guess, what's the word? Body work, right, in a way. And then I've been on this, right, with the TACFIT stuff, the movement.
Yes.
Just movement, quality of movement, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, there's this rehabilitation through patterned movement and through stressing and stretching and pushing on the edges.
I remember at the workshop I was a part of, you were talking about Peter Levine, the Waking the Tiger, when you were talking about these things releasing, these trapped emotions. And he was a part of that. He was a part of when you were there, right? When you were studying with Ida Rolf?
Peter Levine was trained as a Rolfer initially. And he was in the same, what we called our advanced training, which is after we'd been working for a while, Rolf called us all back in and held us prisoner for 6 weeks and taught us the next layer, the deepening of our thinking and our technique as well. And Levine was in the same class as me. And he was always a very light-boned kind of aesthetic guy. He wasn't sturdy like us guys, like a mesomorph, made to work hard for years. And Rolf said, you go and develop that other part, follow that, where your interest takes you. And so Peter was doing his work for years, and he used to come to us the faculty once in a while. He'd show up at a faculty meeting and hand us a chapter of that book that later became Waking the Tiger and say, look, here's the progress. This is what it's about now. These are my thinking. Very exciting journey. And I said in those days, and I still say, that Peter Levine is a major pioneer in psychotherapy because he's the first guy that I know of, and that's qualified, maybe there's other people that are there too. But he's the first one who actually tied very specific meaning to neurosis. He said there are these primary, fight, flight, collapse responses. Great, overwhelming threat, you can play dead, and you don't actually play dead, you collapse.
Right.
Or you can run like hell, or you can square off and go, okay, bring it, But if those are thwarted, like you can't run, you can't flop, and you can't, fight back, something happens in the nervous system where you get stuck in the arousal. And then that forms a way that when you start hitting high stimulus, challenges, whatnot, you keep hitting the stuck point that you didn't complete. So Levine developed this whole methodology of resolving these through watching people's breathing and through very subtle stuff, to track where was that stuck place. And then he would call it out. And his work ended up being very gentle, very evocative, most of the time without touching, but rather sitting with someone and observing maybe changes in color in the skin or their pupils contract and expand, or you could see their heart pick up beats, and then you go, okay, you're on it. There's where it is.
And then another, I went to the dissection earlier in the year, right, with Thomas Meyer's group, Anatomy Trains, and I mentioned your name, and he's like, yeah, he did my first 10 series on me.
Yeah.
The guy who's kind of well known in like the fitness industry, and I mean, the Anatomy Trains is huge, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, Jan Sultan, he was, and also when I went to that fascia conference, it was in Germany, and I would talk to people, and I would say Santa Fe, and your name came up over and over and over. And so when I introduced you, I was kind of, I don't want to be humble, because you're like, I don't want to, like, I'm bragging, but like, you're like this world renowned guru and the Rolfing, if they're Rolfers, like you're this world renowned guru. You're super famous, and what was I going to ask you? Just the Thomas Meyer, and I was going to ask about the nerves. We did we did the dissection, because you had, when I first saw you out here in California, because you live here now, great, and you like, I started working with nerves, and then of course, like, I had my MS situation, my multiple sclerosis, and I was like, when I did the dissection, I was like, I have to see a nerve. What is a nerve? And then it's like mainly fascia, right? And then inside the consistency is like pudding,
It's a gel.
I like a gel. I'm like, okay, all right, So the myelin, right, the fatty tissue around it, like, but around that is the fascia. It's just so fascinating, and we have no idea what's going on here, really, right?
Yeah. Well, what's going on at some level is that there are layers. There's what the osteopaths now, and I won't say all the osteopaths, but with some of people that I associate with,
right,
they're calling it the hard frame. The hard frame is bone, tendon, sinew, muscle, the stuff that's chunky. And then there's inside the hard frame, you've got neural tissue, you've got vascular tissue, you've got the intrastitial matrix tissue, the cellular matrix. And all of these things have electrical potentials. They're capable of charging and discharging. And we understand that a healthy organism in one way could be evaluated by its ability to charge and discharge correctly. And in Levine's understanding, the way he framed it is people are able to charge and they can't discharge, or they're in the lower end of the thing and they cannot raise a charge. And frankly, in let's say in therapy in general, it's easier to get an overcharged system to detune a bit than it is to get an undercharged one to turn on. It's a different order.
So it's harder to release tension than to
It's easier to release it than it is to build the charge, to actually build tone, let's say. If you're hypertoned, Well, then just do a bunch of stretching and hang from an upside down and do, sit in the sauna for hours and get yourself stretched out. But to actually take someone who's got a soft body and begin to build tone, you actually, in some way, you have to get on the inside. You can't build muscle on it. You'd practically have to do a kind of, let's say, development work that looked more like dynamic tension, more like Tai Chi or Qigong, the slow compression, hold, extend, and that stuff gradually builds the tone of the white tissues, the ligaments, tendons, and as that stuff begins to come up, then the outer stuff has a foundation that it can work with. We train differently depending on where we're starting.
Right. But everybody's different, right? Some people need one or the other.
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, no, I'm always surprised that Pavel Tsatsouline,
our guy,
the strong first, right? Now it's strong first. It was RKC, but you trained with him back in the 90s, right? 1990s.
I did 2 5-day seminars with this guy. He was coming. I don't know. Somebody sponsored him to come to Albuquerque. I was living in Santa Fe. I knew about him because of Dragon Door, and I'd seen his books on their catalog, and so I'd gotten one of his books because I thought, this is interesting. Here's a guy who actually trained, was a trainer for the Russian Olympic heavyweight lifting camp, and so I thought, this guy's got some ideas, So I went to hear his seminar. And his opening line, I remember to this day, he says, "Well, we went all over the world, and we took the best techniques from everybody. We stole them, and then we used them to beat you at the Olympics." And he has no sense of humor. He's a very serious man. Well, maybe he laughs, but I didn't think so.
I don't think he's I did his kettlebell certification last year. Just that kind of as an honor, like not honor, but just because I've been following for so long.
Pay respect.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
How was it? Was he funny?
He wasn't the one running it, but I did some other workshops that he was a part of, and I sat with him and at the dinner and stuff, and yeah, he was cool. He was down to earth, but he's what I expected, I guess.
This is more than 20 years ago.
He's probably softened up, right?
He was young.
Yeah.
Probably he was in his early 40s back then.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, but Pavel. Well, so anyway, just to close that circle.
Yeah.
Pavel helped me in my work to understand better what I was looking at when I would try to help people, because Rolfing has got a certain amount. I mean, it's manual therapy. Hands-on, but there's a high educational component to it, which is that when I'm working with someone, I try to get them to be able to inhabit themselves more consciously, pay attention, that you have certain things that you're working with, almost like the ongoing yoga of getting stronger, getting better balanced. When you train, pay attention to these things. So Pavel helped me build my armamentum as well.
It's interesting because I follow Scott Sonnen, right, the TACFit guy, and
right.
I do the Z Health, and he was kind of Zadoriev, who was a Russian. He studied in Russia, Soviet Union in the 90s. Not him, but Scott Sonnen did, and I'm friends with this German named Lars Lienhard, and he works a lot of neuro. He does a lot of the neuro work with a lot of the top athletes in Germany. And he was talking about how Pavel's talking about strength first or tension first, right? And then there was this other guy, Eric Cobb, that was talking about relaxation first, and that's where Scott comes in, right? And I just thought that was interesting, right? Because you're saying everybody needs a different thing, but then he was showing me pictures of top athletes, and they're totally relaxed, right? And for myself, like I couldn't relax, from whatever, just all the years of competing and fighting, I couldn't relax. Maybe I think even from my dad, I don't know, like maybe some things I inherited, like genetically, whatever, from him, from he had a lot of PTSD and stuff. I don't know. I felt like I inherited some of those things. And then adding so anyway, it's really changed my life, just this movement system. And I think really giving me balance. Was my was my point talking about myself. I just find it super interesting,
Well,
just
just
all
about
those
the
things.
integration of
Right.
your background, the things you study, like where we come from,
Right.
and how we arrive here today, like where I am. I'm teaching Rolfing when I teach, but it's informed by all the other things that I've learned, and I try to stay true to Rolfing, even if I'm teaching things that appear to be quite diverse. Rolf was my first teacher. Sort of by hook or by crook, I ended up being a lineage holder, probably mostly because most of those other guys have died already. And I'm one of them left standing, but there it is, And
I had a lot of conversations with Amal, Amal Easton about, Rolfing and, CrossFit, and then now TACFit, just growing it with integrity, like, not to say anything bad about CrossFit, but like just to get certified in a weekend, like, it's not enough. It's not enough. Yeah.
One assumes that if you got to the certification point, you'd done a hell of a lot of background work,
right?
To be honest with you. And then it's time to get your passport stamped, in a sense.
Right.
So it's not just walk in the door and get bang, okay, here's your $500 and you got your ticket.
Right.
My colleague Jim Pascucci has a CrossFit studio in Boulder, and he's a Rolfer, and he trains people pretty hard. But boy, I've seen videos of the people working out in the gym, and they're not bunched up and closed up the way somebody might who works out in a regular free weight gym. There's a different quality to the body.
Right.
And I used to laugh and say, well, gyms are for people who don't work for a living. But I think that's not true now. I think that people go to the gym to get rounded strength, And, Joe Pilates is a great example. He only wrote 2 little monographs in the 30s. It's the only thing that he wrote down. But he generated all this crazy equipment and stuff. But what he says in this little monograph is, Pilates is not a sport. Pilates is what you do to get ready to do the other things that you want to do, so you'll be uniformly toned and not be vulnerable to getting hurt. And I think, okay, there's the bottom line with Pilates. Now, some people do Pilates like 3 times a week, and they do it and do it and do it, and it becomes their thing.
Right.
And my opinion is, reading that and my experience, I've done a lot of Pilates by now with a few different teachers. It's there to build the foundations in us so that when we go to do other stuff, we got the bounce to not get, hurt.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about TACFit because it's it's taken over my life, but health first fitness, and Scott Sonnen, the creator of it, always say, your strength and conditioning shouldn't get in the way of your sport. It should only help you in your sport.
Same idea.
And so I always took that, I did CrossFit. I even got CrossFit certified, and it's its own sport, it's its own sport, which is cool.
It's become an athletic event.
Yeah, the CrossFit Games is cool, but as your strength conditioning, like TACFit, you can apply it to your sport. You can apply it just to your life, right? If that's all you do, just to live your best life. Prevents injuries, right?
Yep.
It helps you recover from injuries because of all the things that we do, and helps you just optimize your life, right? Your brain and body working best. So, and that's all I talk about.
Well, we could expand the idea of yoga.
Right.
The fundamental of yoga, as I understood it, and again, I could be off, but the yoga word in the Hindi is yoke, and it meant to tie body and spirit more together. So you practiced yoga in order to create an integrous organism from which you could maybe explore different kinds of states of consciousness or ways of being. And in that way, it comes all the way back to that original 10 series idea of Rolf, the preparation of an acolyte to go into the temple to pursue deeper knowledge. And so what you're talking about with TACFit, with CrossFit and so on, these are all, in a sense, yogic forms that are emerging in our current moment of culture, where there's so much information that has flowed in, where, you know, when I was a kid, yoga?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
I didn't have a clue.
I would have rolled my eyes, you know. I was never into it.
Nothing. And then now I could say, oh, yoga's, you know, yoga done right is a very useful tool for building a stable organism to do some other explorations. And so are all these other things. It just depends on, it's like walking into a great big space, and there's all these tools, systems that have come here. So some of them are synthesized, you know, from different places. I think we're in a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
A synthesis of so much work is now here. And, you know, all the way from that fine neural retuning to good old Rolfing to getting strong, getting fit, getting put back together after you get hurt.
You know, I wanted to bring up, you know, I went to go see you here in LA. We had breakfast one morning, and you started telling me, like, yeah, I'm started touching nerves, and you started saying things like that, and I told you, like, I felt like my vestibular things were off, and I just told you some of the symptoms I had. Really, I didn't know about the vestibular, and you're like, it's in your brain stem, and started saying some things, and then I went and saw you, and then, you know, later on I would study, like, you know, with the cranial nerves, how I look and stuff, and you had me lay down, you know, I guess touch my brain stem, you know, area, and have me close my eyes and have me look in different directions. And, you know, I had difficulty riding the bike down the hill with my kids.
Dizzy.
Yeah, I would fall over, you know, I would want to fall over. I'd be brave, and I would just look down and, you know, do my best. And, you know, I was really at a hard time walking, you know. And after I saw you, actually, another thing that I didn't realize, but I wasn't looking in a certain direction with my eyeball. You know, I don't know if I got knocked out from a fight, and I wasn't looking up in that direction. And for probably about 2 months after that, I was high. Like, every time I would look in that direction, yeah, I would get like just this burst of, you know, whatever hormones, and just I had no idea that I wasn't looking in that. I think I remember looking up to the right, you know. I wasn't doing that, you know. And you did whatever you did, your magic, and yeah, and that blew my mind. That I still am like.
And we restored the perceptual field, if I remember.
Yeah.
You know, there was a breach here, like a vacant place, and so the data flow in and out of there was not working right. Anyway.
Yeah, it was shut down. And could you talk a little bit about that? What when I went to you know, your practice, and what you did to me?
Well, you know, you had the narrative, which we talked about, which you described, you know, which was a disequilibrium that had been diagnosed as MS, and that's a pretty hairy diagnosis, you know, because people really lose function, and some people die from MS. It's long and slow. But I didn't think about fixing it. What I did was, once I had my hands on you, I just listened to your body, and I held the base of your cranium and put a little traction on your spinal cord, and then asked you to close your eyes and look up, left, up, right. And when you looked up right, it was almost like we were in a boat, and you stepped on the gunnel, and it tipped. And I thought, and I felt the tip, and I went, whoa, what is that? So we came back, and we went the other way, and then I had you look up and around and up and around, and we went back and forth a few times, and the next time I said, okay, look up and right. It didn't tip so far. Now, I don't know how to explain that, Alberto. I can say what I felt, but that's not science-based or evidence-based. That is my empirical moment. But after we did it a few times and tracked back and forth, you got up and walked around the room and shook your head and said, I can't believe this. I'm balanced. And we both were like, wow. And then it took a while to anchor. But so what I did was work on parts of the brain. What I learned from Jean-Pierre Barral, Jean-Pierre is a wonderful teacher, and I've been his student. He's a French osteopath who has been teaching visceral manipulation initially, and then bringing forth neural, visceral, vascular. He's written 5 or 6 books that are all just full of information. He's a very creative cat. And he taught us how to put a hand on the brain, or on the cranium, and feel in to the various foramen where the spinal nerves come out through the base of the cranium, and how to follow from the vault, how to feel down into the brain stem, pons, medulla. And actually, it would have to be sensing at a distance, but it's not metaphysical. It's actually feeling more with a more refined touch. And really, one of the secrets of this is the better you understand the nature of the structure, the more accurate your touch is, the less work you've got to do when you get in there. So the better your map is, the better your treatment is. And all the while remembering that the map is not the territory. Here's the map, but you go walk the trail, and it's nothing like what the map didn't really tell me what the trail was like. So it was a process of discovery then, to feel in and to feel a vacancy and wait and invite your body to occupy this place. Just fill this in. And
it was
but in this conversation, here's what I'm thinking. Because this was a point trauma that started this thing, I would suggest maybe it wasn't MS, but rather a closed head injury that was very persistent and progressive. But once the vector of the hit got pulled out like an energetic spear, that your body could go, I can now I know where I am spatially again. So, and, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a medical doctor. You said MS. Okay, let me feel. But when you say point trauma plus these lingering equilibrium and orientation stuff, then I think, that was a closed head injury. And these are insidious, this closed head injury. And this is a big thing for vets coming back from war. Is the latest thing is that how concussive injuries from explosions ripple through the brain. Let's say you're just, you're walking down a trail and they set off a landmine, and you don't get fragged, you don't get hit with metal, but there's a wave of force from the explosion, and we're like mostly water. So it hits you, and it's like this, and it completely disorganizes your fluid matrix, and the fluid's going slosh, slosh, slosh. And so you end up with concussion type of trauma, but it's not from a solid blow. It's more like a wave that ran through. And people who are exposed to this kind of trauma have a hell of a time finding themselves again. Now, some get over it, some don't. Some experience behavioral changes, like I'm not the same guy I was before that shock wave went through me. They lose a part of themselves, or a part of themselves that was maybe with their PTSD gets anchored differently. I don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to say that I can fix it, but I'm understanding, what I know is it's a different kind of concussive trauma, closed head injuries.
Yeah, I had never been knocked out before, and I was knocked out unconscious. And I remember like them trying to wake me up, and I think they even took me out on a stretcher, you know. Yeah. And my brainstem and everything else remembered, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't like let it go until that moment.
Many, many years ago, I had a chance to work with a guy who was a Korean War vet. And as he described it to me, he was at the Chosin Reservoir in the dead of winter, you know, and here comes who were they? The North Koreans, the Russians. Anyway, he got machine gunned. 5 penetrations from Chi-Com machine gun. And so he had these 5 puckers across his body.
Survived.
And I said, Jesus, you know, did these... He said they were jacketed rounds, so they didn't expand. They just went zip right through him. Nothing hit either an organ, a vessel, or a bone. They just ran through. And so I said, wow, this is kind of interesting. And at one point I put my finger into one of those scars, and I swear I could feel the rifling of the vector, you know, that it was penetrating and twisting. And so I said, I'm just going to press on this, Jim. Let's see what it is. And I pressed and twisted, and all of a sudden he rolled his eyes up, and his arms and legs started going like this, and he fell right off my Rolfing table onto the floor, and his legs were going like he was running. And I sort of got on top of him a little bit and said, hey, buddy, we're here, chill, you know, you're in my Rolfing room. And he kind of came around and rolled his eyes, and he went, Jesus Christ, he said, I was running like hell. And that was the memory of right in his body, complete with all the big motor activity, you know, that as he was being shot, he just was trying to get the hell out of there. The mysteries of the body, you know. Oh my God, there was a story in that vector where that wound went through, and there was a whole memory organized there.
Do you mind sharing that that story of the, you know, you had the woman, she had a broken heart?
Well, sure, as long as you bring it up.
Thank you.
I'll keep it simple and short. I was doing visceral manipulation, and at the time I was fairly early in my practice of it, so I was sort of keeping it compartmentalized a little bit. And this woman had been referred by a client of mine, and this was her buddy who was visiting. And she said, hey, I want to give my friend the session. So this lady came in. I didn't know her from anybody. And I said, how are you doing? She said, well, you know, I'm okay. I'm a widow. And she was a lawyer and some kind of a business person. And so I started working. And her sacrum and her low back were a little funky, and she was complaining of some back stiffness. And so I did back work and normal kind of structural stuff, straightened her out, lengthened her hamstrings, had her walk around. She said, that's good. I said, I'll come back. And I thought, I'm just going to check her kidneys, I says to myself. So I sink in, and I press on her abdomen, and I feel in, and I get on the kidney on her right side, and I'm pressing, and I feel this distinct tug. And the first image I had, it was like fishing when you get a strike, ping, there was like this pull, and it was pulling right toward her heart. And I don't know nothing. I just felt the thunk and the pull. So I finished with the kidney, and I walked around, and I sat beside her and pressed into her heart from the side of her rib cage, and pressed. And I thought, this is weird. It feels to me like the heart is turned inside the pericardium. It's not laying right. And as I had that thing, she started to sob. And she took a few big breaths and cried hard. And I grabbed a light blanket, threw it over her, and I sat beside the table, and I said, just run it off. You don't have to tell me what it is. So as she settled after a few minutes, she said, no, I want to tell you that my husband died in my arms while we were making love of a heart attack, just died. And I thought I was done grieving, but it's still there. And so I went back and felt, and her heart had turned inside the pericardium, and I had the feeling that the heart had actually taken shelter from this overwhelming event and shut down in a certain way. So the heart unwrapped. She, I heard through her friend later that she was feeling a lot better and lots of, going on with her life. But it was another one of those things like Jim with the bullet holes. It's like, oh man, there's a bunch of stuff going on that isn't really very well cataloged, that we don't really understand very well.
Yeah, when you told the story, you were saying how she had found, love later in life. She had worked and, found love later in life, and found.
After that, she found another partner, and yes,
nice.
And had a good life. I kind of left that
nice,
out.
Nice,
but she was able to love again once that sort of had better closure. And she said she'd done therapy, talked about it, blah, 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 felt pretty good. But this was a different level. This was actually the organ. And then I thought, I know now, we suffer. Maybe it's not a broken heart, but we sure can get twisted hearts. Yeah.
I wanted to, I've known you for so long now. It's been, I don't know, mid-90s, early 90s. I don't even know. But Rolfing itself, people had the reputation of like Rolfing is hardcore, like so painful. And, you've shared with me too how your practice has evolved, right? From, really intense pressure to now it's like you're just basically touching. Like, I take my son to see you, I see you, and it's like so gentle now.
Well, I want to say something about this because, indeed, that's how Rolf trained us. But I saw Rolf treat babies, and I saw Rolf treat elderly people, and I saw that she didn't use that same, let's say, highly vectored touch that she used with somebody who was young and strong. And so my concept now is that I still have those tools.
Right.
Recently had a guy come who was a hockey player in a major team. A real nice guy, but a big man, 6'2" at 210 and just wire hard. And I had to roll up my sleeves and dig my elbows into this guy, and there was no kind of way it was subtle because he was just like, and he was the nicest guy you could imagine, a Canadian, everything, just sweetheart. And then I watched some YouTube of him playing hockey, and I realized, on the ice, he's an assassin. So when he got on the table, I could feel the assassin, not so much the sweetheart, like a coiled spring.
But it's I guess it's changed for you, right? It's changed for you from like more isn't better, but just the right touch, right?
Right touch, right time. You need
experience.
Something. You need your big tools. You get them out of the toolbox. It's time to be subtle, to follow the energy, to listen to someone's brain and try and figure out what am I feeling here. That's a very different, but this is for me now, 50 years in, this is the range. That's where it's coming. And learning the nerve work, for example, it's really clear that, first off, when nerves are healthy, they're very hard to put your finger on. I mean, geographically where they are, anatomically, but when you get right down, it's pretty hard to go, got the nerve, there it is. But if a nerve is restricted or in trouble, you can feel it like there's a hardness to it. And so when I find those kind of nerves and I press and I wait, pretty soon there'll be a ripple, and then that hardness will soften. And pretty soon it's like, okay. And then once the nerve is actually released, it's hard to find again. So it's pretty interesting. Nerves don't like to be mashed on. Nerves as endangerment sites, in fact, was true. Don't mash on these guys. They don't like it. But once you find it, if you just press and touch, it's as though you're touching a very primitive intelligence in the body. This is part of the brain. This is part of the brain/mind. This is not just a bit of anatomy that we're touching. This is smart.
You know, you had talked about Teo. He's like, "Can I learn from you? How can I learn from you? How can I study from you?" And I've been talking to you about this now for a while. How can I learn? And you know, yeah, I was lucky enough to do that one workshop with you, and I was like, I'd like to go again and do another one. And then we, you know, like Thomas Meyer has a huge. I mean, he has his own university. I mean, I was looking at it to become. You know, you had mentioned like, yeah, we just find something online, and he has a one that you can structural integration course that you can do partly online, and then you know some you have to do in person, right?
Certified.
You know, and so how you know we've been to talks, right? But what do you have work? How can we change that with you? What do we?
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple things. One is that I'm in a contract with the Rolf Institute.
I see.
So I'm only allowed to teach Rolfing per se, which is a certifying. I can't certify anybody as a Rolfer other than somebody who's come through the Rolf Institute training program. And I've been I'm a company man in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I signed on early. I stayed on. You know, I've been with the Rolf Institute all these years. And and I thought about what it would look like, you know, to start my own school. But I don't actually want it.
Right.
It's a headache, you know?
Right.
At the same time, I'm allowed to teach continuing ed for other, let's say, disciplines, as long as I don't tell people that they can call themselves a Rolfer. So I call it Manual Therapeutics, and that's the name that's on the front of my office, Manual Therapeutics. I service marked it 35 years ago, and so if I give out any kind of diploma, it's that you've had classes in Manual Therapeutics, and I try and stay connected so that that's good for continuing ed, for the requirements of a massage license or some other continuing ed that you might need. So. Workshops.
Yeah. We had, hopefully we get some of those online, some courses, because I want to take them. I want to learn. I want to be able to, I mean, sometimes it's not so easy to travel to like Vancouver. I was trying to go to Vancouver, and I'm like, I tell my wife, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to Vancouver, for a couple of days, But it's nice to be able to access yourself. I mean, you're how old do you know?
78.
78. So I mean, you're a beast, Yes,
I'm surprised.
It's super healthy and strong and all that, but like it'd be a shame to kind of lose all that knowledge. Like every time I speak to you, you're always teaching me. You're always, I mean, it's like mind blowing stuff, right?
Well, we just did the first cut of a educational video. I'm going to do a series of 5 of those, and they're basically for skill building and for distilling some of what I know into a very straightforward format. Look, you got to understand this about these relationships, and a little bit of technique and a bit of anatomy, and so I'll be producing those partly in response to what's happened with this pandemic. That we can't do courses anymore. There's social distancing and travel problems, and so I'm sort of being forced into it, even, like the rest of us.
Yeah, I understand. I'm like old school or whatever you want to call it. Like I'm like online, But now we don't really have a choice, right?
You got to do it. Yeah, you want to teach? Get behind the camera.
And I'll appreciate it because then I can access it.
It's like what we're doing here.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So how can people find out about the course? Where can they find it?
I have a website, which is just jansultan.com. It is WordPress, and I have to say that's somewhat antiquated. It's been up for 15 years, and It needs
Well,
maintenance.
yeah, we'll help you get it get
And
it
then
up
I'm
to speed.
gonna open a second website which will have these educational
Okay.
units on it, because uh, because WordPress's admin side is kind of Byzantine to work with on the backside. You know, when you're behind the website trying to put things up, there's multiple steps to move things around, and I'm not a very digital guy. I mean, I'm an analog person, right? I like gauges that go around. I like watches that do this. My feet are size 11 and a half. You know, I'm not a 46.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wanted to kind of go back to the Santa Fe, like, you know, you were sharing me with a story about Amal Easton when and him getting kind of bullied, right? And you telling him to stand up for himself, and because he stood up for himself and, you know, punched the guy or whatever, it started his martial art journey,
Yes.
which got him to go train with Muay Thai with Doug Pandorf, and then of course that turned into jiu-jitsu, which turned into me doing jiu-jitsu, and then me going to Brazil, and probably us, the reason why we're even sitting here today. And I used to train in your garage in the 1990s, you know, every single day. You know, it's like, you know, you work on my son when every chance you tell me when we have the opportunity to go see you. So, you know, thank you. Thank you for just inspiring me. I mean, for so many years, like, just thinking in a different way. Like I was telling you, like I was, you know, I would roll my eyes at all these, you know, these different ways of thinking, you know, back when I was younger in my early 20s. But now it, you know, it dropped the seed, right? All those years back when I hurt my back, and you just, you know, you knew where I was, of like, wow, that's mastery. I want to be that good at something.
Well, the best I could say is that I'm motivated to teach because I want to pass it on. I want it to go into the hands of other people. And back, you weren't in this original group, but I had a boys' club for a while with Amal and Solar Law and Andrew Kahn, and who else was there? Another Abel West. And I said, I'm going to do this class one Sunday a month for a long time, and you don't get to pay me, but the only requirement is that you show up here. And if you have too many excuses, you know, you wanted to go skiing that Sunday or you wanted to do something else, well, then don't come back. But if you like what you're learning here, the cost of admission is that you show up. And so my original intention was to put tools in the hands of these young guys so that when they were doing their sports event and somebody got dinged, you know, they could go, hey, I could help that. I learned this and that from Jan back in the day. And that was the original thing. And some of my colleagues even said, hey, you're teaching these guys Rolfing, and they're not going to Rolfing school, and you're blah, blah, blah. And I just said, these guys don't get it. I'm doing the old way. I'm an adult practitioner in my community, and these are the kids of close friends, and I'm passing this stuff to them. No, you don't get to call it Rolfing. Yes, you can call it manual therapeutics, or you call it nothing, just stuff you know. And so I'm still doing that. I love to teach. Yeah. I love to spread the thing, and it's because I want to put the tools in other people's hands that I was gifted and given to inspire them to look, take this out, use it on other people, spread it, spread goodwill and healing.
Help people.
Yeah, heal people, fix them up. You know things other people don't know, so use it. And it's sort of under all the licensure and the professionalism and all that stuff. I frankly could care less about it. I really care just about putting it out there and hopefully people learning it, using it well. That's my thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me to come out and talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I hope to talk to you again soon.